I find absolutely horrific. 2 police officers are being investigated on suspicion of manslaughter following an incident at a care home. Now, Sussex Police were called to this care home in St Leonard's on Sea on June the 21st. There were reports that this man had a knife. Well, when they arrived, they found the man was 93 years old. He was disabled, he was in a wheelchair, he only had one leg, and he was holding a knife. Now, one of the officers then decided this man was a danger and deployed their pepper spray, and then used his baton in order to calm the man down. When this failed, the other officer drew his taser and fired at this 93-year-old disabled poor man. As a result, or I can't say that, but his condition worsened, but he later died 3 weeks later on July the 13th, and that is an ongoing investigation. They're being investigated on suspicion of manslaughter. A shocking incident. And this is another story about care homes as well. Many people in care homes who have dementia are being given prescriptions that they don't need. This is called chemical coshing, and the chemical kosh prescriptions for dementia sufferers have surged by more than 50%. So people, many medics have been warning for a long time about stopping prescribing antipsychotic drugs to the vulnerable. So essentially what happens for those people who have dementia, who may be very confused, they've been given antipsychotics drugs, and as a result, of course, they're sedated, and we were talking about that before the break. And I find this absolutely horrendous, particularly when you look at in 1 in 3 care homes, more than half of all residents were found to be taking those drugs. Well, is that just very bad medicine? Is it actually an infringement of their human rights? That is not care in my book. Joining me now is Penny Hutchinson. She is a care rights activist whose 82-year-old mother has dementia. She is in a care home. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I mean, I don't really know where to start with those 2 awful stories. The police tasering a 93-year-old gentleman who's in a wheelchair with one leg, who has dementia, who clearly is confused, and then all of these poor elderly people in care homes being given drugs they don't need.
Okay, so starting on the first story, I think whilst none of us might know all the details, based on the details we do know of the gentleman in the care home who's since sadly died, in my opinion, there's an awful lot gone wrong before it even got to the police getting there. So why was this gentleman allowed to get into that state in the first place? And then from then on, what's happened, it feels very difficult to understand why an elderly gentleman in a wheelchair, that he couldn't be contained or calmed down or talked to without those drastic actions being taken. Interesting, the police were called and not a medical team. So yeah, it sounds, based on what we've heard and what we know, entirely overdealt with, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, why were the police called? I thought the whole point about a care home is the clue is in the title, isn't it? It's care. And the thing is, when you have someone with dementia, and I know this, I've treated many people with dementia, they are very frightened, they're very confused, they don't know what they're doing. And what you have to do is not threaten them, you have to look after them and put your arms around them.
Exactly. And, you know, there's lots of things that trigger someone with dementia or any other kind of mental illness. People are triggered by certain things, and once they're triggered, you have to know how to help them come back from that place. And you know, it is entirely possible to do. I've seen it myself every single day. You know, I assist care home residents with coming back from having been triggered in a situation. You know, the police going in, just the police going in and themselves will have exacerbated the situation for him, seeing the police, I would imagine. So yeah, it sounds like it's been dealt with dreadfully, but we need to wait and see what comes back from the inquiry.
I just can't get my head round why. I cannot believe a gentleman with one leg who is 93 years old, who's confused and worried and frightened, is a threat. Why on earth would they use pepper spray? Why would they use a baton? And why would they taser him?
Exactly, and he was in a wheelchair, so when somebody is in a wheelchair, you've got the added benefit of being able to wheel them to somewhere where they're not going to cause anybody else any harm. Sometimes it's more difficult when somebody is actually mobile, because you have to be gentle of how you sort of move them to a different place. But it's unbelievable, isn't it? It's inexplicable at the moment, and we need to wait and see what comes out of it.
Sure.
But whatever does, we have to have learnings from it, because whatever's happened, it's not been right, and we need to make sure that we all learn from that.
No, and just in terms of this other article that I read out, the fact is that many people who are in care homes, and obviously, as I said, they get confused and they're anxious, and they often don't know where they are, and obviously that's very frightening for them. And many of these patients are being given needless drugs. They're being put on antipsychotics, and there are lots of reasons for that, because obviously it calms them down. And I just wonder if they're being given for the good of the patient or the good of the staff.
Well, I know since 2010, we across the country have done a very good job at actually reducing the amount of people who are taking psychotic drugs. But since the pandemic, that has shot up, and I think I read somewhere 18 to 28% now.
That's
which
right.
is a huge increase.
Well, it's 55% increase. It's gone up by half,
Yeah.
over half.
Now, there is a place for antipsychotic drugs, and you'll know that far better than I do. But also, I believe that through that point of the pandemic, as part of the Rights to Residence campaign, I was heavily involved with the team who were leading that, in looking at what was happening to care home residents when they were completely cut off from their loved ones and their families. That had a huge impact on care home residents, some more than others. That will certainly exacerbated dementia, without a doubt. The other thing to bring into that is the fact that you still can't get a doctor to go face-to-face to see people in care homes. And if you can, it's very rare.
You still can't?
No. So my mum's care home, there's over 100 residents in the care home. Every Monday, the doctor used to go along and do like a bit of a ward surgery thing, where the care home say, these are the 4 people we'd like to see. That's still done to this day over the telephone, but that's another battle I'm fighting at the moment. But that will be happening across the country. Elderly people, whether they're care home residents or elderly, are being prescribed antibiotics for UTIs over the phone.
That's for urine infections, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, as you know as well, if someone with dementia gets any kind of infection, but particularly a urine infection, that can display as a psychotic episode. They can become aggressive, they can become more confused, and actually it's down to the urine infection. If you imagine all those infections being misdiagnosed or not treated, it will look like the dementia has got worse and progressed into aggressive behaviour. That will then be being treated with antipsychotic drugs.
Yeah.
Now, you'll also know that if somebody is having an aggressive episode who's got dementia, it takes time. You need to talk to that person, you need to distract that person, you need to comfort that person, and that can take 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour.
Sure.
But it's achievable. It's far quicker, isn't it, if you haven't got enough staff, or if you've got less qualified staff because you've had to bring agency staff in who don't know the residents, to get a drug out and give them a tablet, because then they'll be asleep for a good half hour, 2 hours, and you can get on with looking after everybody else.
Well, the bit I just don't understand is, clearly a medical doctor is involved because they have to prescribe these drugs. Now, clearly, I imagine, and I've been in this position, where you're told a different story by the care home staff that then leads you to prescribe those drugs, because otherwise you would not prescribe those drugs.
Well, yes and no. So, for example, my mum was prescribed antipsychotic drugs on a PRN basis. So,
as required, yeah.
So if the care home, if at a point my mum did need them for aggressive behaviour and they couldn't calm her down, and she was going to cause herself harm or somebody else harm, and they had tried and gone through the process of making sure they haven't triggered it, gone through the process of coming down. Yes, there are occasions, and I've seen there are occasions when actually, if that individual can't be calmed down and they're so distressed, it is the right thing to do on occasion. So I think there is, I said at the beginning, there's a place for them, and I think there is a place for them. But what's happened is it's clearly become the go-to route and the first step that people are taking, rather than actually going through the process of trying to just talk to people, calm them down,
Yeah.
you know, explain what's happening. Distraction is the best and biggest thing that can be done.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for talking to me. That's Penny Hutchinson, who's a care rights activist, whose 82-year-old mother has dementia and is in a care home. I'm